Hello and good evening, everyone. First off, thank you so much for attending this session. I'm just giving some time for some of our colleagues to patch in. We're looking forward to having this session all together. And just to give you some insights, basically, I would want you to know that all of you stay put. The agenda of the session is as follows. We are going to give you some introduction about Al-Nazaha, and definitely we'll go through the fraud triangle theory. And of course, I would want all of you to stay put for the session code, because your session code would help you to get your certificate of completion. And of course, you can use this and place it wherever you want in your office, because this is an important session, in my opinion. Furthermore, this would also help you in getting your accreditation from the ACFE. Regarding the Q&A, ladies and gentlemen, I will definitely try, and my colleagues will also try and help out to answer as much as questions as possible. And hopefully, I will try my best to ensure and answer as much questions as we can. In case we could not answer it, I will try and have a look at the Q&A. If you had any questions in the Q&A, please feel free to put out questions where are relevant. I will try as much as possible to answer your questions as well. If I couldn't, please feel free to send an email to info@alnazaha.ae. All of you have registered, so definitely all of you will have some contact details where you can raise these questions too. So since we have quite a few number of participants at the moment, I will proceed with the session. First off, I would like to give some introduction about Al-Nazaha Association. We are a non-profit organization registered under 190 by virtue of the Ministerial Decree number 133 on 12th of June 2019. So obviously this is a great moment for us where we are a year and 2 days old. So that's really something for us to be proud of. And of course, we are an affiliate of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners with 1,171 members currently in the UAE. So this is quite a big number, if I may say. We are open for the public. I'm sure all of you were able to register, and we really appreciate that. Furthermore, we have certain vision within our organization, which is to promote integrity of an aware and promising community. Our mission is to provide an awareness raising and meaningful activities for all social categories in order to foster the concepts for integrity and anti-fraud. Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, our core values are integrity, reliability, professionalism, efficient, and innovative. And of course, you will see during the course, we will give you some insights as to what are our major focal points and what are the type of trainings that we do to raise awareness and what are the activities that we do. One of these activities that we do is obviously the fraud awareness training that we're going to conduct now, which is mainly focused on the fraud triangle. So the outline is as follows. We'll basically discuss the fraud triangle. We will be discussing the fraud types. And we will, of course, give you a case study, because we believe that with whatever theoretical example or theory needs to follow a logical example to it. And of course, we want you to have that understanding of how this theory applies to the actual real life example, if I may say so. And of course, we're also going to give you some insights on how to minimize fraud. Certain points that we're going to mention is, of course, not necessarily applicable to some of you, but you could relate to it in certain points that we will discuss, inshallah. Now, moving on, I would want to have your participation, if I may, to get your inputs as to if any one of you know, as you can see right in front of you, we have the fraud triangle, which comprises of opportunity, pressure, and rationalization. We're going to pull up a poll to basically understand or give you some time for you to tell us who, in your opinion, has come up with the fraud triangle concept. I will just give it 1 minute exactly so that we can actually come up and I can show you what the actual answer is. Thank you so much, guys. I can see excellent participation. I really appreciate that. So I'll close it in 10 more seconds. Perfect. 57% of you were actually correct. It's Donald Cressy. He was the one who came up with this, with the fraud triangle theory based on interviews which he conducted with convicts. Now, we have studied this fully and understood that he has actually done certain steps which came out and showcased that this theory actually works. Now, the reason being why I asked this is because, as you could see from the poll, there were quite a high percentage which were leaning more towards the ACFE. Although the ACFE fully supports this theory, it is very important to know that Donald Cressy was the one who came up with this theory. Now, of course, what I would want to do is I will go each point by point so that we can basically discuss and understand what these areas are. First is pressure. Pressure basically means the pressure on the individual which motivates him to conduct the crime. And of course, it can be due to financial pressure as well. We understand that financial pressure means financial issues. It can be workplace debt problems, shortfall in revenue, inadequate pay. Now, as you can see, some of these are not exactly only related to your financial pressure that you have, for example, on personal level. It can be also at a corporate level. It can be at a company level. It can be a lot of other pressures that we believe might seduce or might push an individual to commit the fraud. It's very important to highlight here, ladies and gentlemen, that in some organizations, you actually have targets, correct? For example, sales have targets. Now, for the sales to reach the target, they have certain numbers they need to meet. Now, during this time, the sales force or sales agent might be pressured to meet certain achievements or meet certain targets. So obviously, having these kind of pressures and not being able to deliver will, of course, lead to fraud. One point I would like to highlight here is that based on the ACFE 2020 report to the nations, 42% of individuals who committed fraud was due to living beyond needs. This has been revealed in all studies from beginning of this report, which ACFE establishes or distributes or publishes on yearly basis. What does this exactly mean? Basically, we need to make sure that we are living by what we have and not beyond that. As you're aware, in certain communities, we always tend to go above and beyond, which consequently puts us under a financial pressure. So, some of the things which I believe all of us need to be very wary of is that sometimes we might not want to say no to certain people, to say no to our kids, to say no to our wife or our husband or any one of our siblings. However, certain point in time, we need to ensure that certain things are not being ignored. The fact of the matter is that you have a specific budget in mind and you have a specific financial income. Going above and beyond that will finally put you in a situation where you will be in a financially difficult status. That's the reason why one of the main factors which Donald has come up with is pressure. So I'm trying to look at questions if there are any while I'm going through it. I will move on. Thank you, Assam, for asking this question. Basically, this presentation is for the copyrighted by us, Al Nazah Association. So of course you can take notes. We're more than happy if you list down the points that you are mentioning. But no, this presentation will not be shared. Now, moving back to other steps. Let's go to the opportunity. Now, before we move on to the opportunities, I would like to also take a poll here, and I would really appreciate it if you could give me your thoughts on opportunity. In your opinion, so I'll pull up the poll for that. Thank you very much. Based on the ACFE 2020 report to the nations, one of the main factors that increases opportunities to commit fraud is? I would really, really appreciate all your participation, which I'm seeing. Thank you very much for that. Ten more seconds. Perfect. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate that. So basically, based on your responses, 68% of you have mentioned that it's due to lack of internal control. So I'll keep that for the end of the slide. And I would want to give you some inputs on this as well as we go. So factors that increase opportunities to commit fraud, right? So what are the opportunities that help us provide these type of areas of gaps in order to fraudsters to commit the fraud? One of them, which is ability to get around internal controls. So in certain areas, obviously you have certain controls in place, such as maker-checker controls in place for financial transactions. As you're aware, maker-checker controls are very, very crucial in any part of the organization, including and specifically also with financial transactions. This is due to the reason why we always mention that you have to be very, very aware that your staff are following the maker-checker controls in place. There are no password sharing. There are no, basically trying to circumvent these type of controls. Because if these controls are circumvented, then of course you are opening an opportunity to fraud. Second, inability to judge quality of performance. Why do we say this? This is very important because of the fact that we have certain areas where, in my opinion, or in our opinion, basically, it's very important that management are aware of each and every individual's activity. The management are aware of what the performance of each individual is. And that's the reason why there should be some control in place, that other than maker and checker, there are certain reviews which are being conducted on periodic basis or in timely manner to ensure that such a thing are being conducted, and you are able to obviously ensure that the controls are being followed. Lack of an audit trail. Why do we say lack of an audit trail? When there is no audit trail, ladies and gentlemen, you are actually opening the door to fraud. Why do we say so? It's due to the fact that if you have an audit trail and each and every person understands that there are certain trails or traces of the approvers or the makers, and what are the things that they did, what are the things that they approved, and for such a thing to be made available is very, very crucial. The reason being is very straightforward. Let's say if you go into the desert, right? You will have some steps where you could see there is someone who stepped in this track, correct? Now, if you are able to know who the footprint of this individual is, so for example, it's a footprint of a camel or a footprint of a horse or human being, let's say, then you will be able to know who passed by here. So it's the same for this case as well. If you have an audit trail, then you will be able to ensure that whoever is conducting the reviews, whoever is conducting the checks, they are following proper processes of your organization as well. Having said that, the last but not least point, which at certain times can be sort of a bit controversial at some point in time, is that failure to discipline prior fraud perpetrators. Why do we say that as well? It's because this fraudster will be able to move into other organizations and will conduct the same type of activity in other organizations as well. That's where you close the opportunity for the fraudster to be able to go in any other organization. This will also help you to ensure that any disciplinary measure that you're taking against this fraudster, you're informing the rest of your counterparts as well. For example, in the by the mandate of the Central Bank of the UAE, the Central Bank currently has a mandate that all banks are required to report staff which are working in their bank who have conducted fraudulent activities to be reported to the central bank. This will ensure that this individual does not get hired in any of the other banks in the UAE. That's one. Secondly, the central bank also requires all banks in the UAE to report certain fraudulent transactions to the central bank as well. Why? Because this will help the central bank ensure that this individual who's a fraudster who has received fraudulent funds does not also open up in an account with other banks in the UAE. Now, going back to the poll that we have raised, the question was that in your opinion, and based on the ACFE report to the nations, what was the primarily issue for these control weaknesses? As you can see here, one of the main issues, ladies and gentlemen, was exactly as 68% of most of you said, it is the lack of internal control. So this is where all of you need to understand that internal control is very, very crucial to have within any organization. And the reason why we also concur on what the ACFE says, is that it's very, very crucial that all the organizations do have this type of internal control in place, and of course have reviews which is being done for these internal controls. Moving on to the last point, which is rationalization. Now, rationalization is for people to rationalize their unacceptable behavior. This basically helps the fraudster hide from the act of his dishonesty. Okay, and it's very difficult to highlight this, because at point in time you might believe that this individual or this fraudster is actually believing what he did is right. There is something I would like to highlight here before moving on to these points. I'm sure all of you have heard of, seen, or read in your childhoods or whenever at a point in time, Robin Hood. So what's the philosophy of Robin Hood? Robin Hood basically says, taking from the rich and giving to the poor. That's his rationalization. That's our rationalization as well. However, if you can just step back and say, all right, if these individuals, if these rich people have gotten their money because of whatever it is. So Robin Hood's philosophy is, these individuals have not earned this money, they have stolen it. So even if they have stolen this money, then we should always turn back and say, we have a legal system, the legal system needs to take charge of this. So it's not up to Robin Hood to decide and take this money from the rich and give it to the poor, because that's not how the actual world works. The right way is to give these people to the jurisdictions, to the judicial department, to the law enforcement authorities, and let them decide what needs to be done to them. The reason why I'm coming up with this philosophy is that I have seen in my career, there are certain people who give this type of rationalization that, well, I thought that this was the right thing to do, and anyway, your organization will not even get impacted. So some of the common rationalizations that I would preferably go through it with all of you is, and I've seen this most of the time, I'm sure so have you, is that I'm only borrowing the money. So for them, it's basically, oh, I've just borrowed it for a certain period of time and I'm going to give it back. Now, this is where sometimes I believe there's a very gray area that we need to be careful. Borrowing money does not mean that if you are going to go borrow money from a bank, that's you rationalizing it and it will lead to fraud. Of course not. That is due to the bank knowing that you are borrowing this money, correct? There is a financial contract between you and the bank. So it is normal and it is within the legal jurisdiction for you to get this money. So that's perfectly fine. However, if you're working in an organization and let's say you're an accountant or an individual is an accountant or Nader is an accountant. So Nader cannot turn around and say, well, I was just borrowing the money. That's not how the universe works, if I may say. It's totally different than that. So it's very, very important for us to understand that such rationalization should not be even thought of. Nobody will get hurt. So that's also something else that we've been hearing many, many times. So it's just money, it's not a big deal, and sometimes even we've had some issues where we have noted that because it's a big organization and it's a multi-million-dollar organization, no one's going to get impacted. It's just a few, how do you say, it's peanuts for the organization, which also is not correct, because whether it's a dirham or it's a billion dirhams, it's still the same. Rationalizing such points is totally out of the question. Third, I deserve more. What does this mean? This means and we have seen it in many, many instances, that we have seen certain cases where there are staff where they believe they have not received certain, salaries, certain bonuses as where they should. So basically they turn around and say, well, you know what, it's something I deserve, it's something I need. If the organization does not give me a rating of X or a bonus of Y, no worries, I will give this to myself. Basically rationalizing, justifying to yourself that what you are stealing from the organization is basically what you deserve. Fourth, it's for a good cause. So again, the whole ideology is, if it's for a good cause, you or that individual does not need to think in such a manner. And that's where we need to ensure that we train our staff and inform them that whether it's for a cause which can be for someone's sick child, or it can be for a charity, or whatever it may be, such things, such behaviors is out of question. Now, one point I wanted to highlight here as well, before I move to the next point that I want to give a relevant example to. It's very important. I don't know if you guys have seen a video or a documentary or based on a true story. It's a movie based on a true story called Bad Education. What is Bad Education? What is this about? It's basically about a principal which was managing a school, that school was actually not a top tier school, and he was mandated for him to take the school up and above and beyond where it is and make it number one. So there were certain things where I saw in the movie where sort of corroborated the rationalization and the pressure, as we discussed, and of course somewhat the opportunity. One of the things that you need to be made aware of, ladies and gentlemen, is this individual, the principal of the school, was able to use the funds where he collected from all the investors in order to use these funds for himself. Now, his justification at that time, or rationalization at that time, was, well, I need this money in order to be able to pay my expenses. I need this money in order to be able to iron my suit. So imagine, he was billing the school thousands and thousands of dollars just to be able to iron his suit. What does that tell you? For him, it's something that he rationalized. It's something that he said, well, I need it. It's something that I have to show myself in front of everyone. So thousands and thousands of dollars, that's really definitely nowhere I can see, and I'm sure all of you can see, that this is rational. It's definitely irrational. Last but not least, they always say, we'll fix the books as soon as we get past this little financial hiccup. Now, I would like to give an example here. It's like the Madoff scheme. I'm sure all of you have seen the documentary, you've read it in so many places, right? So what was the issue of that scheme? Was it the intention of Madoff to actually come out and create this pool for fraudulent purposes? No, it wasn't. He actually created this pool on the intent to invest and generate revenues for the group of the stakeholders. And that was the whole intention out of it. However, when he started to invest, there were certain situations where he would not be able to meet his business plan. He would not be able to meet his actual targeted revenue. So what happened in this instant? Basically, the whole ideology of him to be able to invest and meet his targets all collapsed, especially due to the financial difficulty back in financial crisis back in 2008, 2009. This is where his whole plan collapsed. So what did he do? He tried to basically give funds of the old investors based on the funds which was being invested by the new investors. So the new investors would come, put some money, then the old investors would get some money, presuming that this is from revenues which his fund has generated. So it's always about this, ladies and gentlemen, that it's not about how very quick you can overcome this situation, because actually you will not be able to, and you need to make sure that stakeholders are being made aware of a financial problem. It's always good to be completely crystal clear with stakeholders as to what the actual financial problem is, because in certain instances that financial problem or that little financial problem might turn into a really big one. So we have to make sure that we are clear on that as well. So this is basically the fraud triangle theory that we have been able to cover up. Now, so a few things that I'll pick up some questions which were raised. So obviously, Abdulaziz, there is no specific order of the opportunity and pressure and rationalization. All of them are equal and they're just there in the triangle, just to clarify to your point. So one of the questions that one of our colleagues, Mujahid, has also highlighted is, what if auditor or regulator is part of the fraud? Well, that's the reason why we have certain jurisdictions which audit those as well. So for example, the internal audit department have the external auditors. That's one. Secondly, you have the regulator, which comes from time to time and checks. And then you have the committee within that organization that also review what the auditor or internal auditor is basically reporting. One of the things that was also raised, this is the last question I'll take, is that there were certain, can we provide certain tests or control measure on uncovering bribes? So we will be able to give you these tips, sir, but what we would need to do is we would have to make sure to come back to you on this in a different session. We are working on this, and rest assured, inshallah soon, we'll be able to come up with a good detailed way of how we can test and measure controls that we have in place. All right. So moving on, what we would like to do is, we would like to share with you a video by the ACFE, and I would like to please ask you to prepare your volumes and listen to this and look into this actually. But it's all written in Arabic and English so that you can, of course, understand what's being mentioned. All right, perfect. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, Bob met all the criteria of this fraud triangle. It's very important for you guys to understand that we need to ensure that this triangle or the fraud triangle theory is always thought upon and is always used as a good insight to ensure how to prevent such frauds. Now, I would like to pick up some pinpoints about common traits of a perpetrator based on the report to the nations 2020. 93% of perpetrators are males in the MENA region. Now, this is quite a significant number. However, this would obviously make sense due to the fact that there are a lot of male dominated areas of work that we have currently in the MENA region. And of course, most of them in this area are males. So it's expected that a high percentage of us are male perpetrators. 53% of the perpetrators are between the age of 31 and 45. However, the median loss of perpetrators are more than 55 years of age, which is the highest. So what this is trying to showcase to you is, due to the fact that you have certain executives, you have certain individuals, although the count might be quite significant for the ages of 31 and 45, it's very crucial to mention that most of the executive levels are at actually this age, which is 55. It's very crucial for everybody to understand that there are certain age categories where we need to be made aware of. Now, this does not mean that at an age of 55, someone's going to conduct a fraud. No, because obviously this is based on statistics. But the main median loss is between the age of 31 and 45. So the higher percentage of it is between the age of 31 and 45. 89% of the perpetrators did not have any criminal records. So this is quite significant, in my opinion. The reason being is because we have the report to the nations have noted, based on their review, is that just because someone does not have a criminal record does not mean they don't have any, or they're not perceptive to doing any fraud. That's absolutely incorrect. Of course, background checks are very important. It's very, very crucial for you to make sure that you need to have some type of criminal check before hiring an individual. However, because this check is resulting to you in a negative result with no criminal background, does not mean that that individual will not conduct any fraud, because 89% of those have actually conducted fraud. The fourth point in this is that the higher educational degree of an individual, the higher the median loss due to the position held. So as I mentioned earlier, this is quite correlating with each other. The reason being is, if you have actual individuals who have a higher level of education, obviously their seniority in that organization or an overall organization might be higher. So the median loss to that will, of course, be higher as well. So it's very important and very crucial for us to also highlight this point as well. The point before the last, which I wanted to definitely share this with all of you, is that the most common fraud schemes in high-risk departments comprise of 70%, 76% of all occupational fraud. So why are the report to the nations highlighting this? This is due to the fact that there are certain high-risk departments which are constituting 76% of all frauds. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot go over this multiple times of how important this is. The reason being is due to the fact that there are certain departments in all organizations which needs quite close attention to. As I mentioned before, executive and upper management, which you are talking about board members or CEOs, CFOs, COOs, as well as the purchasing department, were two of the 8 departments which had 62% and 81% schemes respectively in corruption. So that gives you quite a high number of understanding how executive and upper management level, along with the purchasing department, of course, also have our high risks and conduct a lot of or had a lot of instances of occupational fraud in them. Purchasing department is very, very, very delicate due to the fact that you will deal with a lot of suppliers and you will deal with a lot of stakeholders that might not be directly involved in the organization, but might have some interests with some of the stakeholders in that organizations. As you're aware, ladies and gentlemen, in this part of the world, there's a lot of relationships with big, families. And it's something very, very normal. For example, for me, as an Al Ansari family, we have an extended route of many different relationships. Now, of course, if I work in an organization and I'm aware that this company is working for this organization as a supplier or as a vendor, I need to disclose it. The reason why I need to disclose it is because I need to ensure that my company is aware that I have some relationship with this supplier or vendor, so that the committee who identifies which supplier or vendor to use is aware of such a thing. And of course, if I'm in purchasing department, that even makes it more crucial for me to make this type of statement or this type of announcement, so that I need to ensure that I'm out of the vendor choosing or the tendering. Although the count of occupational frauds are committed at employee level, the executives would have a higher impact in terms of amounts involved. So as I mentioned earlier, although the count at employee level might be very high, the count of occupational fraud might be very high, it's very important to highlight here that the impact or the amount of at the executive level is much significant and much higher. That's the reason why we always say that it's very important to have a pure, proper corporate governance structure by end to end of the organization. It's not that it's at the employee level or staff level. It's also at the very, very top of the pyramid as well. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before I move on to the next slide, I would want to see if there are any questions that we might have, so I can answer them. Well, again, going back to one of the points that one of our colleagues, Mahmoud Al-Utaybi, mentioned, is that can we consider opportunity as the first and most motivator of for fraud, or is it pressure? Well, that's a very good question, Mahmoud. It's actually all. So it's about understanding that any type of the fraud triangle, any type of it can constitute fraud. So an opportunity can be there, pressure need not to be there. Of course, rationalization need not to be there, but because of the opportunity, the fraud has occurred. What do we mean by that? If you put certain parameters in place of maker-checker controls in place, and due to the opportunity of not having specific checks being done for maker-checker controls, there will be some financial transactions that go through, and these financial transactions that go through might be conducted by a fraudster. So a fraudster might have submitted a fund transfer request at the branch. But because of the maker checker control breach or not following the maker checker control process, the fund transfer did go through. Now, if the maker checker controls were different and there was no password sharing, then and there, this would have stopped, because the checker would verify, for example, certain checks that needs to be conducted, such as callback, and then the financial transaction would actually not go through. Thank you for that question, Mahmoud. Yes, I'll take up one more question. Yes, thank you very much. One of the questions raised by Shankara Narayanan, it's future threat. Considering the current COVID-19 situation and so many job losses, are we expecting a rise in internal fraud? Any measures that would help in preventing that? That's also a very good question, Shankar, and thank you very much for highlighting this. Obviously, in the current COVID-19 situation, we understand that fraud is gonna occur in all areas. So it's not only with internal fraud, it's also with external fraud. So definitely your perception is correct, but that does not mean we cannot trust our employees, or that does not mean that we cannot trust our staffs. That's actually not the case, because the trust goes all round and round. It's also with regards to external fraud as well. But yes, definitely, due to the COVID-19 situation, you will definitely have certain frauds which might be occurring more. And we anticipate that this will continue to grow until hopefully the matter will settle. At the moment, where the government of UAE, specifically the government of Dubai, has opened its door for working from office, and nearly all the staff are working from office at the moment. Of course, these type of situation will decrease, but definitely due to the COVID-19 situation and the financial situation that all organizations are going through, there's going to be, or as all of you have seen, there are certain layoffs that are happening in certain organizations, and that's something inevitable. However, as we have seen, there's always a rise and fall. So inshallah, after this COVID situation settles and economies start to pick up and economies start to improve, everything will go back to normal. Now, I would like to move on to the presentation, please. I would like to highlight an example which I would like to discuss in detail, actually. It's with regards to the Theranos, the company Theranos. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this company or has been made aware of this company. I'll give you some idea about Theranos. Theranos basically was a blood testing startup company, okay? Now, its founder was Elizabeth Holmes. Basically, Elizabeth Holmes invented Theranos because she identified that there are certain processes where she could reduce in doing the blood tests. Now, obviously, as you're all aware, blood tests is something very, very crucial in the day and age that we are all living in. She identified that the waiting time to get the blood tests are quite long. And she came up with a very, very good idea that she needs to start up a company to reduce the turnaround time for the results to showcase itself. Now, obviously, this company got a lot of support from the government, or the US government. And of course, it was a very, very, very good idea that Elizabeth came up with. Now, in 2014, this company was on the top of the universe, obviously, because they came up with a very good idea. The tests were coming up very, very nicely. They were doing certain tests which showcase how much time it takes for the company to give results to its patients. And of course, this was a phenomenon breakthrough to the tests which were being conducted. Now, in 2014, as I mentioned, this was a breakthrough for Elizabeth and the world. And needless to say, I have to mention this because it's very, very important. She thought herself back then that she was the second Steve Jobs. I mean, as you can see in the picture over there in front of you, you can see the black top that she's wearing and the high neck that she's wearing over there. If you look at Steve Jobs' pictures, that's actually the case. And you can see, even in the documentary, which has been released recently this year or end of 2019, this was actually some of the points that they mentioned, because this is what she saw. She saw herself as a female Steve Jobs, okay, that really made herself into a billionaire. And basically in 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion dollars, and that's quite a significant number. And imagine, at her age, at her capabilities, that's something extraordinary. Now, the second picture you can see here, which is Tyler Schultz. He was basically a staff, newly joined, and he was actually related to one of the shareholders and board members. His grandfather, George Schultz, was basically a board member and one of the main stakeholders in Theranos. Now, Tyler basically came and worked in the lab and basically knew what type of results these machines are generating. And he knew the flaws of these machines. So he was basically made aware that these machines are actually not 100% accurate, and they have to change certain results manually and basically not give the accurate information out to the patients. Now, Tyler was in a very difficult situation. You have to understand, his grandfather was one of the prominent board members back then. He had a significant stake in the company back then. So for him, it was a little bit difficult to raise these points. He tried over and over again to highlight these points to the management of Theranos. However, he found out throughout the time that actually Theranos management, including Elizabeth, are aware of these flaws of the machines. However, they were at the thought that no, your claims are inaccurate. We know better. We know what you're doing. You just do your BAU activity. But he actually was very, very clear that what the management are showcasing to the public is totally inaccurate and invalid. Now, what Tyler did, I believe, was very, very strong, and he stuck to his gut feeling, and he stuck to the results he had, which showcased that these are inaccurate. So he contacted New York State Public Health Lab and alleged that Theranos is actually manipulating a process known as proficiency testing, because they were using a machine and they were saying this machine is 100% accurate, and maybe 0.0001% might have certain, discrepancies in it. But he said that these machines are inaccurate and they are not correct, especially due to the fact that back then, Theranos machines or test results was mainly focused for the American soldiers. So he was very, very anxious to make sure that everyone is aware of this, so that at least people's lives are not being held at stake. And you're talking about human beings. You're not talking about robots anymore. So it's very linked to this. So due to Tyler's push and Tyler's adamant basically mindset that I have to raise this. This is unacceptable behavior. And imagine he was in a situation where he had his grandfather on the board. He had so many things that so many other factors that were there for him not to be able to report this, but he did at the end of the day because he thought this is the right thing to do. Now, what happened was Elizabeth Holmes was ousted as CEO, and basically she was charged with a massive fraud. And unfortunately, whether the results uh, were not very positive due to the fact of Tyler reporting this, but at least they he prevented this wrongdoing from happening. And of course, the labs were closed and testing centers were closed, and of course, it shuttered the operations altogether. So this is the story of Theranos. Before moving on to linking Theranos' story to the fraud triangle, I wanted to highlight something that you might face difficulties in the due to the high volume of hits on the website, ladies and gentlemen. You might have some issues. So my colleagues are informing me that an email will be sent out to all registered attendees with the needed details. Just thought of putting it out there since my colleague here informed me to let you know of this, please. Now, moving on and comparing this situation to the fraud triangle. Now, what was the opportunity? What was the rationalization? What was the pressure in this situation in the case of Theranos? So first and foremost, basically, one of the main factors that Elizabeth saw was that there was an opportunity, again, in good faith. There are always the faith that starts everything, correct? Because she saw an opportunity that she needs to raise money from investors that will be able to support it. However, she was also smart enough to identify investors who were not completely 100% aware of this type of medical knowledge. Because if certain investors in this company had this medical knowledge, they would oppose this 100%. Because actually, during this time that Theranos was growing, there was a lot of questions being raised by other medical experts and, of course, by other hospitals, claiming that this philosophy that in the matter of minutes you would literally get the test results is inaccurate. So there was an opportunity for Elizabeth to pull all these investors that don't have much medical knowledge background. So that is one part. The second part is that once there were certain questions being arised that how the company's technologies work, this is where the pressure came, and this is where the pressure started to happen from the stakeholders to Elizabeth. The reason being is because there are a lot of pressure from the media. There was a lot of pressure from some of the internal staff that, you know what, this is, you know, the results are inaccurate, such as what Tyler was mentioning to them. And it's very important to highlight this, ladies and gentlemen, because of the fact that you have an organization as big as Theranos that is being able to manipulate the results and being able to manipulate the outcome of these tests to the public. And the public are actually believing this and, of course, using this because the public don't have such a knowledge, right? Now, there was one more pressure there that Elizabeth Holmes had, is that they had the pressure that they had to bring out the machine as soon as possible, because time passed by significantly and they had so many issues in being able to actually create a machine that would be viable. So definitely the this helped or this pushed the fraud element for Elizabeth to conduct the fraud. Last but not least, as I mentioned earlier, it's all about the rationalization. She believed literally, even if you see in her interviews, that she was wanting to help people. That's it. That's the whole ideology of it. From her perspective, yes, the machines were not 100% accurate. However, the machine would save a lot of lives. But the other counterpart argument is just because it saves life does not mean that you can give out inaccurate results or inaccurate understanding as to what the test results might give out. It's very important to all to understand that just because her intention was to help people, which frankly that intention was there, but that does not mean for her to be able to rationalize to give or cover the discrepancies that the machine would basically give results on and say, no, 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 this is 100% accurate. What she could have done is she could say, you know, this is the machine that we have. Yes, it's not 100% accurate. It has certain discrepancies, but we are working on it. That would be the right approach, and not the approach which says, no, no, this is 100% accurate and our machine is fully, it gives the correct results. That, in my opinion, is where she went wrong and where she started to rationalize to herself that the ultimate goal is to save people, and you know, we need to come up with this machine ASAP and we have to sell it in the market. Having said that, these were basically the elements of the fraud triangle, which was also relevant to the actual case study that we had. So I'll pick up a few questions. Yes. So one of the questions that was raised was the whistleblower the main reason why Theranos was doomed? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James, for this question. It basically was. If Tyler would not come up with such whistleblowing, then you would not be able to, obviously, the authorities would not dig in deep and they would not actually revisit what they have been doing before. Yes, the mistake was from certain authorities. However, there were certain tips which Tyler gave to the authorities, for which the authorities were made aware of how the test results are being manipulated. So yes, you're on spot, James. Thank you very much for your question, but that was mainly the reason why Theranos was Theranos's legend or history was ended. Another question by Yuan Ming. How should whistleblower be better protected? What is the public's view of whistleblower actions? Well, thank you for this question, Jan, and it's actually a very important question. There is certain policies that within an organization you need to create to help protect whistleblowers. So first and foremost, you need to ensure that whistleblowers are not being shunned upon, and whistleblowers are not being investigated to identify who the whistleblower is. If the whistleblower themselves have mentioned to you that feel free to disclose my name, then so be it. However, if whistleblowers are requested by themselves to remain anonymous, the investigators or the reviewers who are reviewing the case should not push on the whistleblower to disclose himself. Of course, there can be always going back to the whistleblower and obtaining more information to validate what he or she is saying, but they should not request them that you have to disclose yourself. That's totally wrong. Third, there are certain laws which hopefully will be passed here in the UAE to help protect whistleblowers, even at the government level, at the federal level. So yes, there needs to be government interception. There needs to be a lot of encouragement for staff to blow the whistle and be comfortable. Because if you show the staff that by blowing the whistle, you will not be at harm, you will not need to disclose your name, then staff will automatically open up and start blowing the whistle as well. Okay. So one of the other questions that are there is that are there whistleblower rules and regulations regarding the safety in UAE? Well, as I mentioned, Asif, thank you for your question. Basically, at the moment, we don't have specific laws pertaining to whistleblowers. However, you will definitely, in the near future, have certain laws and jurisdictions to help protect the whistleblowers, basically. One last question by Radwan Al-Harmi. Basically, what is the best alternative of whistleblowers? Well, if I have mentioned if I've understood your question accurately, Radwan, basically, the best alternative for whistleblower is if the whistleblowers are not being heard by their organization, it's always okay for them to speak up to the most senior management of that organization. And at the end of the day, if no one has come back to them and no one has highlighted anything, of course, it's upon the whistleblowers' thought or action to go out and report it to alternative channels if they wish to. Nobody can stop them, and no one should stop them from doing so if in case they have something very important to mention. One last question I'll take here. How does a whistleblower navigate the responsibilities and possible strict privacy laws? This question was raised by Nasser Al-Amiri. Thank you, Nasser, for your question. Yes, I mean, their responsibilities is basically ensuring that they are highlighting something which is of importance. It should not be out of something that out of a grudge against the person or a grudge against their superiors or their colleagues. It should be a genuine case which is being highlighted, and of course, in our opinion, it should be very, very oriented and to a point that there are certain evidences which is being provided to the people who are reviewing the whistleblower allegation. Now, in order to save time, I will move on to the slide where how to minimize fraud. So basically, a few tips that we would like to mention here is the tone at the top. So ladies and gentlemen, it's very important for you to understand that the tone at the top creates and maintains a culture. It creates a culture for the whole organization. If the tone at the top is wrong and is not clear, then the whole organization will collapse. And the whole people working in the organization will not be able to give their 100%. We have to make sure that this is clear. I have to mention this. Thankfully, here in the UAE, the tone at the top of our rulers is very, very clear. No to fraud, zero tolerance to fraud. Our rulers here in the UAE have made that clear. And we have to make sure that we continue this at the organization level, and we have to ensure that this is being basically poured down the line in order for us to ensure that at the end-to-end side of the organization, such tone is created. And of course, last but not least, it's very important to always show that we are open to any type of reporting. We are open to any type of whistleblowing. We protect our whistleblower. So these kind of showcasing to your organizations is very important to safeguard and promote staff from reporting any instances of fraud. Second, you have to keep out or look out for red flags. It's very important, ladies and gentlemen, to ensure that all your staff are vigilant and are aware of recent fraud trends which are happening in the market. It's very, very, very crucial for your staff to know market trends, for your staff to know what is the actual trends which are happening in the market, to be able to protect themselves from this type of trend. And of course, it's good for, once you're aware, you will be able to be vigilant. And once you're vigilant, you'll be able to pick up on these red flags. So it's very, very crucial for us to be vigilant and look out for these red flags. Third is continuous education and training. Now, this session, if I may say so, and I hope that's the case that has been so far, this session is an example of that. This session should be promoted in your organization. I don't mean this exact session, but these kind of sessions should be done within your organization. These kind of sessions should be done within your areas, and our association is more than happy to help support you in your organization and provide the continuous education, training, awareness sessions for your staff, of course, and your customers and your suppliers, because it's very important for them to know what type of fraud is there, and they need to continuously be made aware using these training sessions. Training session is just one part of it. The second part is, of course, using other means of communications. You can use social media, you can use SMS, you can use email, you can use your intranet, and so far and so forth. So it's very important for you to ensure that there is continuous education and continuous training for your stakeholders. Why do I say stakeholders? Because it's not only to your staff, it's also to your customers, to your vendors, suppliers, so far and so forth. And the staff, of course, I need to mention this, it's not only your junior staff, it's also the executives, it's also the board of directors, and so far and so forth. Fourth, review and test controls continuously. It's very crucial that all organizations have this in place. It's very crucial that all organizations test the controls they have in place. That's the reason why, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important for you to have audit trails, because this audit trail will ensure and help those who want to test the controls to make sure that these controls are adequate. So just to give you a very easy example, when you see car manufacturers creating these, safety cushions, right, in their car, if you notice, there is a safety control standard that tests them. The reason why these are being tested is because they have to ensure that these measures or safety control measures in their car actually works. So it's the same for us as well. And we have to make sure that we do this as well. And of course, as I mentioned before, there should be adequate reporting channels and these reporting channels needs to go out to all stakeholders so that they can know who to report these incidents to. And of course, last but not least, there needs to be proper fraud proactive detection, which is being done. Now, detection does not only mean system related, it can be a sort of mystery shopping. It can be sort of certain reports which are being generated in-house by your IT staff. And of course, we'll be more than happy as the association can help support your organization and come up with these proactive detections as well. Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, it's very, very, very crucial for you to have a fraud policy. It's very important that each organization has a fraud policy and a designated fraud investigation team. Why do we say so? It's because when you have a policy in place and this is being shared across your organization, individuals know who to report to. Individuals know what kind of fraud are to be considered. Individuals or staff within your organization know what fraud is about. But if you don't have such policy in place, if you don't have certain investigation team in place, then of course such points, certain points will not be accurate. All right. Now, since I have covered most of your questions, ladies and gentlemen, and due to the fact that we already have, unfortunately, ended our session, I must apologize that we will not be able to take more questions. However, as I mentioned earlier, please feel free to send us an email. Our details are all on the website. You can send us an email request for any details you want. We, as Al Nazaha Association, will happily support any organization within the UAE to help grow their fraud risk framework, their structure within the organization, and we will happily support you in preventing fraud.